bacterial cell or it's complex like a eukaryotic cell. Every cell is surrounded by a cell membrane. Our next chapter after cells is just about the cell membrane and how it works. The second thing all cells have is cytosol, or you may remember it being called cytoplasm. Same thing. It's a fluid material. All cells have DNA, which is incorporated into chromosomes. They do not necessarily have it in a nucleus. That's one thing that eukaryotic cells have that's different than prokaryotic cells, is that eukaryotic cells have their chromosomes in a separate area, which is the nucleus. And the last one, and we tend to leave this one out, at least when we're teaching freshman bio, we usually make a blanket statement that says that prokaryotic cells, bacteria, have no organelles. We say that all the time, that they have no nucleus and no organelles. Technically, that's not true. There is one organelle that they do have, and that is the ribosomes. Because ribosomes are involved in making proteins. If you remember from the chapter we're talking about right now, the DNA is the instructions. The nucleic acids are the instructions for making proteins. So you have your instructions, you have your workers, and that way you can have a functional cell. You don't necessarily need the other organelles in order to be a living cell, although the other organelles are necessary when we're talking about complex multicellular organisms. So these are the parts of our different cells. The focus today is actually going to be, though, on why cells can't just grow exponentially. Why can't we have gigantic cells? In other words, why are bacteria so small? Why are there no giant bacteria? And why is it that protists, the single-celled protists that live in lakes and ponds, why are they so small? And how come you have to be made of millions of tiny cells? Why couldn't you be made of less, larger cells? And the answer boils down to metabolism. The bottom line is that in order for a cell to survive, it needs to take in nutrients and process them, and it needs to get rid of waste. That's metabolism, taking in nutrients, processing it for energy, and getting rid of waste products. The bigger a cell gets, you're going to find that there's less exposed surface area or exposed surface in comparison to the amount of volume inside the cell. So we're going to be mathematically calculating this in a second, and then we'll talk about it in a little more detail. But the bottom line is, if you think of this, if you think of this cube as a cell of a particular size, anything that needs to get to the center of that cell is going to have to travel this distance x from the outside of the cell to the middle, whatever that distance x is. If you were to, instead of having one giant cell, break that same cell into 4 smaller ones, the distance to get to the middle of any one of these smaller cells is going to be much, much less. Now, nutrients can get to the center faster and waste can get out faster because every exposed surface is a place where stuff can enter and leave, and stuff can only travel so fast. And so basically if a cell is too big, the center of it would starve to death. Stuff would not be able to get to the middle fast enough, and waste would not be able to get out fast enough to maintain life of that cell. So the bottom line is that the smaller a cell is, typically the greater the surface area to volume ratio is going to be. So something that they could ask you to do on an AP exam, and when we take our test on cells, something I will ask you to do, is I will give you cells of different shapes and sizes, and I will ask you to calculate their surface area to volume ratio and tell me which cell would be the most efficient. So what you'll basically do is you'll calculate the surface area, you'll calculate the volume, literally divide surface area over volume and get a number. The number that's the biggest is going to be your answer. That's going to be the cell that stuff would make it to the middle the fastest because it has the most exposed surface. So it's not too complex. And if at the end of today you understand what to do, but you're still not quite understanding why it matters, that will become very clear next Tuesday when we do the lab. Because you're literally going to take pieces of gelatin, you're going to drop them in dye, and you're going to time how long it takes the dye to get to the center when you have different shapes and sizes. And that will clarify for sure how the math of this relates to a cell getting its nutrients to the middle. So it'll be very clear visually when we do it next week. For now, this will show you again, if we have this one giant box, obviously you don't have as much exposed surface. So if stuff needs to get to the middle, there's a long distance it's got to travel. And stuff can only travel so fast, in or out of that cell. If instead we replace that one cell with a whole bunch of small cells, now all of these are exposed surfaces, as well as in between, nutrients can get in and out much more efficiently. And so this is basically why cells are limited. On the formula sheet, which we did not use for this chapter, but we will be using again for the next chapter, they list for you the formulas for surface area and for volume of several different shapes. So you will have this provided for you. I do want to comment on two of the formulas, the way they provide them. So for surface area of a cube, they give you this, that capital A, the surface area of the cube, is going to be equal to 6 times little a, which is the surface area of one side of the cube. I find that their definition, their formula there, a little confusing. Another way you could write it would be 6 times one side of the cube squared. Or you could do 6 times length times width, which of course the length and the width on a cube would be the same. So that's just two alternate ways you could write that formula, just to clarify, because the way they wrote it there can be a little confusing. The other one that I find a little bit confusing, the way they present it to you, is this one, where they give you, to calculate the surface area of a rectangular solid, it says that it's the sum of the surface area of each side, that is what it is, that's true, but that's kind of confusing. Because what they're basically saying is you get the surface area of this and this, plus the surface area of the top and the bottom, plus the surface area of the left and the right. And you'll add all of those together. I think a more efficient way to write that formula, and I wrote it down here, but I don't know if that's a little low for you to see, would be do length times the width, plus length times the height, plus width times the height, and multiply your answer by 2. I think that's a little clearer definition of how to do it. But again, most of you are in higher level math, so you know how to do all of these already. So we're going to practice it. I have 3 sample cells. We're going to calculate the surface area and the volume of each. And then I'm going to have you guys tell me which cell would be the most efficient. There was an error in the outline. Make sure, if you're following along the outline, and I fixed it, I think, before most people downloaded it, but it should say, when it says the best surface area to volume ratio in the outline, it should say the word largest. If yours, by some weird chance, says the word smallest, that's an error. You're looking for the biggest number, so you're literally going to do this. You're going to use the formulas. Get the surface area of the cube, get the volume. Once you have those 2 answers, put the surface area over the volume and get a number. Do the same thing for your sphere, do the same thing for your rectangle. Whichever of the 3 numbers is the biggest, that's going to be your most efficient cell. It has the most surface area per volume. One last comment, because I know some people are already there working it out. You do not have to calculate with pi. You don't need to multiply 3.14. Just leave pi, because when you get to the ratio, you're going to get pi over pi, and it's going to end up canceling. So you don't need to actually multiply by 3.14. You can just leave pi as is in your answers for surface area and volume. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. We're going to come back and go over it. And that's pretty much all we're going to do today. That is our goal. All right, I think most people have probably gone through the first one, so I'm going to go ahead and do that one just as a sample and make sure everybody's on the right track with this. So surface area for your cube would be 6 times 5 times 5, which is 150 centimeters squared. The volume is length times width times height, which is 5 times 5 times 5, which is 125 cubic centimeters. So the ratio is literally going to be 150 over 125, and you get a ratio, a surface area to volume ratio of 1.2. And that's literally your final answer for that shape. And now you do it for the second and third one. Again, your biggest number, the biggest ratio, means it has the most surface area. That's going to be your final answer to which cell is the best. All right, so for our second one, the surface area of a sphere is going to be 4 pi r squared, which basically comes out to 16 pi centimeters squared. The volume is 4/3 pi r to the third, which comes out to 32/3 pi, or you could change that to a decimal of 10.66 pi centimeters to the third. When you divide this out, as I mentioned, pi is going to cancel. So you're going to do 16/10.66, and you get a ratio of, for this one, 1.5. So that's our second one. So far, our sphere would be more efficient than our cube. Yes?
We're going to have the formulas, right?
Yes, and you will always be given the formula sheet, exactly. All right, last one, the rectangular solid. So this is the one where the surface area can get you. It's going to be 2 times, and you just need to make sure you multiply all the numbers together. So it's going to be 6 times 4. I'll put a little bracket here. Plus 6 times 0.5 plus 4 times 0.5. So you multiply basically the length times the width times the height, the length times the height. You do that, and you get 58. And then for the volume, it's just, that's easy. It's length times width times height. So 6 times 4 times 0.5. Which gives you 12. And so 58/12 gives us a ratio of 4.8, which would make that one our winner, our most efficient cell. So for this particular problem, your answer would be that the most efficient cell would be this one, the rectangular solid, because it has the highest surface area to volume ratio. And again, if you understand everything, you're like, okay, I know how to do it, I know how to get the answer, but I really don't understand why the biggest number is the best answer. That will become more clear visually when we do the lab activity. Because you'll cut these to different sizes, drop them in liquid, and you'll see how fast stuff can get to the middle. And every time, the one with the biggest surface area to volume ratio is going to be the winner. Stuff will get to the middle the fastest. All right, last thing, there are 2 shortcuts. I'm just sharing them with you. They're not provided on the formula sheet. But you could always use these, if you can remember them, to get your answer a little faster, or even just to double check that you did it right. So the sphere, the ratio for the sphere is actually just 3 over the radius. In other words, without doing any of that other work, if you just take 3 over the radius of the sphere, you're going to get 1.5 for the, just like you did for the problem. And for the cube, it's 6 over the length of a side. So if you take, for the cube, which was our first one, and you do 6 over 5, you get 1.2. You get the same answer as when you did all of the work. So it's just, all I did was just combine the formulas. I'm sure you could figure it out yourself as well. But if you combine the formulas for surface area and volume, you can combine them into one formula, and that would give you a shortcut not provided for you on the formula sheet, but it would help you to at least double check your answers and you'd know if you got them right. There is no shortcut for the rectangular one. So that's actually the last thing I wanted to show you.